They told me afterward that 6 days was too long. Brannock said it plainly, the way he said everything, standing at the passage door with his arms folded, his voice flat with the particular worry of a man who has served the same king for 19 years and learned to hide it behind directness. 6 days, and the wolf had not rested. 6 days, and 3 healers had been sent in and turned back. 6 days, and the entire holding of Duskreach was moving at half volume. The way a household moves when it knows the man at its center is in a kind of pain it cannot reach. I told Brannock I was fine. He looked at me the way he always looks at me when I say something he knows to be false, which is without expression, without challenge, and with a patience that is somehow more pointed than either. Then he went back to managing the holding, because that is what Brannock does, and I went back to not sleeping, because that is what I was doing. The wolf had been in distress since the new moon. I did not understand why. I had felt the bond ache before. Every unmated wolf of middle years knows it, that low, persistent pull toward something absent, like a note held just below hearing, but this was different. This was not ache. This was agitation. My wolf pacing in a way I had not felt since I was young and new to the crown and had not yet learned to hold myself still. 6 days of it. 6 days of that interior pacing, that restlessness I could not name or calm, while I sat in the great hall of Duskreach and gave orders and reviewed the garrison reports, and held my face in the shape my council expected of the Alpha King of Tharnwell. They call me the Grey Wolf. I did not choose the name. It came from the northern packs some 30 years ago during a border engagement that I will not detail here. What it means in practice is that I am known for stillness. I do not raise my voice often. I do not move quickly toward anger. I have been told that this quality in a king is either reassuring or unsettling, depending on who you ask, and I have found that the people who find it unsettling are generally the ones I most need to be still around. My wolf is, by the account of every pack reader who has ever assessed it, strong, dominant, disinclined toward compromise, also for 6 days running, entirely unable to rest. I had sent the first healer in on the 2nd day, a capable man from the garrison's own pack medic staff, experienced with wolf distress, recommended by Brannock. He came back out in under an hour. He said the wolf was not responding to tending, that it was not a physical injury presenting, that in his professional assessment the wolf was searching for something it could not find in this location, and that perhaps I should consider returning to the capital and consulting the senior pack readers there. He said this respectfully. I thanked him and did not follow his advice, because I could not leave Duskreach during a frontier assessment season, and also because I had the private conviction that this was not a problem the capital's pack readers could solve. The second healer I sent was a woman from the village at the edge of the Greymere wolf runs, a wolf whisperer by practice, old enough to have tended 3 generations of the Duskreach pack's more difficult cases. She lasted 4 hours. She came out looking unshaken but honest, and she told me that in her 40 years of practice she had never encountered a wolf in that particular state, and that what she could say with confidence was that it was not madness, it was not illness, and it was not grief. What it was, she could not tell me. She left me a tincture for settling and went home. The tincture helped nothing. By the 5th day, my second-in-command had stopped bringing me candidates and started looking at me with the specific expression of a man who wants to say something he has not been given permission to say. I gave him the permission. He said, "The wolf knows something you don't." I thought about that for a long time. I had decided some years past that the mate bond was not for me. This is not a dramatic declaration. I want to be precise about it. I had not had it burned out of me, or chosen to reject a fated mate, or done anything dramatic in that direction. I had simply, over the years, come to a quiet working conviction that the bond had passed me by. I was 43. Most wolves know the pull of the bond by 30 at the latest, a certainty, a recognition, a draw toward a specific person that cannot be mistaken for anything else. I had never felt it. I had been in the company of every ranked woman my council had arranged for me to meet, and I had respected them, found them capable and interesting in the ways that people are interesting, and felt nothing that resembled a bond pull. My wolf had been still for all of it, polite, present but unmoved. I had told no one this conclusion of mine. It seemed a private thing to have concluded, and also it seemed the kind of conclusion that, once stated aloud, becomes a weight someone else is always attempting to lift off you. My counsel already had complicated feelings about my unmarried state. I did not need them to have complicated feelings about the reason. So I had said nothing. I had run the kingdom. I had governed Tharnwell well, I think. I am not given to false modesty, and I have the evidence of the frontier assessments and the treaty records to support the claim. I had held the Greymere Wolf runs through 2 difficult seasons. I had been fair and clear and occasionally merciful in ways that cost me politically, and I had not regretted those. I had, in short, made a complete life. I had simply made it without a mate. And then my wolf had started pacing, 6 days before the night I am about to describe to you, and I had found myself sitting in the great hall of Duskreach at midnight unable to sleep, listening to the Ashfin wind come off the moors through the gaps in the stone, with the particular hollow feeling of a man who has concluded something that the world has not yet agreed to confirm. I heard the gate bell at midnight. This was not unusual. The garrison received supply runs at odd hours during frontier season, and the bell was not alarm-pitched, just the flat announcement of arrival. I did not move from where I was sitting, which was at the far end of the great hall beside the banked fire, with a territorial report open across my knees that I had read the same 3 paragraphs of 12 times without retaining any of it. I heard voices at the gate. I heard boots on the courtyard stone, light boots, a single person, unhurried. I heard Pren's voice, which was the gate guard who had the midnight shift, saying something I could not make out. Then a woman's voice, clear and practical, explaining something about a delivery. I did not look up. The voices continued. There was a pause of the kind that happens when someone is being redirected. Then the sound of boots again, crossing the courtyard toward the East Passage. I went back to the territorial report. My wolf lifted its head. I had not felt it do that in 6 days, not with a full attending lift, the kind of interior motion that means something specific. That means the wolf has registered something and is choosing actively to orient toward it. For 6 days the pacing had been directionless, anxious. Now the wolf's head came up like an animal that has heard its name. I put the territorial report down. I did not know in that moment what was happening. I would understand it later, looking back. The mate bond operates in ways that are not always legible in the moment, that declare themselves in pieces, and then all at once. What I knew in that moment was that my wolf had gone from 6 days of unceasing, directionless distress to a sudden, absolute attention, and that the direction of that attention was the East Passage. I stood up. I was already moving toward the East Passage when I heard Pren's voice again, and then a sound I had not heard in 6 days from that direction. Silence. Not the held-breath silence of something wrong. The other kind. The particular quality of silence that happens when something stops. Then the wolf in my chest did something extraordinary. It went still. Not the stillness of depletion, not the gray quietness of a wolf that has worn itself out. It went still the way an animal goes still when it is finally, specifically, answering something, when it has found the scent it has been searching for and stops moving, because it no longer needs to move. Full stop. Interior quiet of a depth I had not felt since I was a boy and didn't yet understand what I was feeling. I was in the East Passage when I heard a woman's voice from behind the door at its end. The door was the one that led to the Holdings infirmary, the room where my wolf had been tended, unsuccessfully, for 6 days. I had given the room over entirely to this purpose. I had not slept there. I had been sleeping badly in the council chamber, and then not sleeping at all, and tonight not even pretending. What I did not understand was why Pren had brought a supply delivery woman to the infirmary. What I understood later was that Pren had been working a double shift for 2 days, was exhausted, had heard herbs for the East Quarter, and had redirected accordingly, without distinguishing between the garrison's East Quarter stores and the East Passage infirmary. An honest mistake. One that changed my life. I reached the door. I did not open it. I stood outside it with my hand on the latch and I listened, because I was not yet ready to understand what I was already starting to understand. The woman's voice was unhurried. She was talking to the wolf, not in the structured cadences of a pack medic running a protocol, not in the deliberate soothing tones of the village whisperer's craft, but in the plain, direct way a person talks to something they are genuinely curious about. I could hear her moving in the room, the soft sound of a pack being opened, the quiet click of a glass bottle set on stone. "I don't know what's wrong with you," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I do, but I'm here now and I'm not in a hurry, and if you want to tell me, I'll listen." There was a silence. Then a sound I had not heard from that room in 6 days, the wolf settling, a long, slow exhale, the shift of weight, the quiet. I opened the door. She was kneeling on the stone floor beside the wolf, which was a large gray animal from the Tharnwell royal line, not my wolf in the literal sense. My wolf lives inside me, as any alpha's wolf does, but a wolf of the pack's inner circle, my wolf's closest proxy in the physical world, and the one whose distress had mirrored mine most exactly these 6 days. She had one hand resting on the stone floor beside it, not touching it yet, simply present. She was looking at it with the focused attention of someone doing a task they are taking seriously. She had dark hair that was coming loose from its braid, and she was wearing the practical clothes of someone who had been traveling. A good heavy cloak, boots with morclay still on them, a worn leather satchel sitting open on the floor beside her with jars and wrapped packets of dried herb visible inside it. She did not look up when I opened the door. She said without turning, "You can come in. He's calm enough." I came in. She glanced at me then, a quick assessing look, and I saw her register something. I do not know what she saw on my face, but she noted it and returned her attention to the wolf without comment. She picked up one of the jars from her satchel and opened it, and the smell of dried ashen moss and cold murair came into the room, and my wolf, the wolf inside my chest, did the interior equivalent of closing its eyes and breathing out. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. 6 days. She made a considering sound. "Has he eaten?" "A little, not well." "What have you tried?" I told her, the healers, the tinctures, the pack reader from the garrison who had theorized that I needed to take the wolf back to familiar territory. She listened to all of it, and when I was done, she said, "None of that would have worked." "No," I agreed. She looked at me again, a longer look this time. I do not think she had yet registered who I was, or perhaps she had registered it and simply found it, in this context, less immediately relevant than the wolf on the floor in front of her. Both conclusions seemed possible. She was not a woman who appeared to find things alarming that she had decided not to find alarming. "May I?" she said, and she held her hand just above the wolf's flank, waiting. "Yes." She lay her hand on the wolf's flank. The wolf sighed, a long, guttering exhale like something released. It put its head down on its paws, and the mate mark surfaced on her wrist. I saw it happen. A clean line of silver light along the inside of her left wrist, the mark that every pack reader will tell you is the physical record of the bond recognizing itself. The bond that forms between fated mates, not manufactured but found, not built but acknowledged. A biological fact of the wolf kind written on the skin in a script older than any of our kingdoms. It was there, legible and unambiguous, in the time it took me to draw one breath. She looked at it. She turned her wrist slowly and looked at it for a long moment with the same focused attention she had given the wolf. Then she looked at me. I held out my wrist. The mark on mine was already there. It had surfaced, I think, at the same moment hers had, or close enough that the difference was immeasurable. 6 days of my wolf in distress, of that directionless, agitated pacing, and here it was, the reason. Not illness, not grief, not the absence of familiar territory, the presence of something approaching. The wolf on the floor turned its head and looked at me. I have never been entirely certain how to describe what that look contained. Pack wolves do not communicate in human language, and the inner life of a wolf is not a simple thing to translate. But it looked at me with the expression of an animal that has been trying very hard for 6 days to tell someone something, and has finally been understood. Then it turned its head back and put it in Senna's lap. She let it. She looked at me over the wolf's head with her wrist still slightly extended and the mark still visible, and she said, "I don't know a great deal about how this works." "Neither did I said, "until tonight." "Is it?" She stopped, reconsidered her question. "What does it mean specifically, in practical terms?" I thought about the best way to answer that. I said, "It means the bond has recognized you. What happens after that is a matter of choice. It always has been." She nodded slowly, as if this was the answer she had expected and had wanted to verify. The wolf shifted in her lap, comfortable, and she settled her hand more firmly on its back without thinking about it, the automatic gesture of someone who has spent a great deal of time with animals. "I should tell you," I said, "who I am." "I know who you are," she said. "I've seen the heraldry on every flag in this courtyard, and on the gate, and on the garrison commander's desk which I walked past on my way in." She paused. "I'm Senna. I was supposed to be delivering Murherbs to the garrison stores. I think the gate guard made a mistake." "He did," I said. "I'm glad." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not yet read. I would learn over time to read her expressions, but that night they were still new to me, and she had a face that did not perform its interior life for the convenience of observers. Then she said, "I'm not a wolf. I have no pack. My mother was a healer on the Moredge and I learned from her, but she was not wolf kind either." "I don't know what that means for the bond." "It means the bond decided for itself," I said, "as it always does." She looked at me again. "You're very calm about this." "I have been not calm for 6 days," I said. "I am extremely grateful to be calm." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one, a softening at the corners, a recognition of something unexpected. She looked back down at the wolf in her lap, and her hand moved in a slow, steady stroke along its back, and the wolf pressed into it with a contentment I had not seen in that animal in longer than 6 days. I did not know, yet, how long the bond had been trying to surface, whether it was 6 days or 6 years, whether my wolf had been searching for her since before I had consciously given up on the search. Pack readers have told me different things on this question since. I have never fully resolved it. I have decided it does not entirely matter. I sat down on the stone floor across from her, with the wolf between us, and I asked her about the Moredge. She told me about the village of Sorn, which sits on the boundary where the Ashfin moors thin out into the lower grassland, and the air begins to smell of salt from the distant coast. About her mother's practice, which had been a general herbalist operation, not wolves specifically, not pack medicine, simply the local remedy knowledge of a woman who had learned it from her own mother, and added to it over 40 years of attention. About what it was like to grow up in a house full of drying plants and handwritten notes, and the particular smell of crushed feverwort on a cold morning. She told it simply, in the direct way she had told me the wolf had 6 days of distress, and that none of what I'd tried would have worked. She did not embellish and she did not minimize. She was reporting, in the way that people report things when they have spent a long time in the habit of accurate observation. I listened with the whole of my attention. I had been doing a great deal of listening over the past 6 days, most of it to my own wolf's distress, which had not been informative. This was different. This had the quality of something I wanted to hold carefully, the way you hold a thing you have not had before and do not want to drop. We talked for a long time. The wolf slept between us. The fire in the wall bracket burned lower, and neither of us moved to tend it. Somewhere in the third hour, I realized that the hollow feeling I had been carrying for years, the one I had described to myself as an absence, a working conclusion about the mate bond and my place in its logic, a settled resignation that had required no active maintenance because I had made peace with it, was gone. Not diminished. Gone. Like a stone, I had grown so accustomed to the weight of that I had forgotten I was carrying it, until suddenly I was not, and the absence of the weight was the thing that told me it had been there. I did not say this aloud that night. It was not the kind of thing I was ready to say aloud that night, but I registered it, with the quiet precision I had spent 43 years developing, and I held it where I could see it. I said, "You should sleep. I've kept you talking for half the night." She looked at the small window set high in the infirmary wall, through which the particular color of deep night ashfin sky was visible. Not yet the approach of dawn, but no longer the full dark of midnight either. She said, "Is there somewhere I can sleep here? I don't think I should ride back in the dark." "There is," I said. "The infirmary has a healer's pallet in the side room. It's yours." She nodded. She looked down at the wolf, which had not moved and appeared to have no intention of moving. She said, "Will he be all right if I move?" "He'll follow you," I said. He did. She stood up and the wolf rose with her, and she crossed to the side room door with the wolf a step behind, and she looked back at me once from the doorway with an expression that was still largely unreadable but had something in it, something I could not yet name, something that had the quality of a beginning, and then she went in. I sat on the infirmary floor for a while after that. I thought about what the morning would require of me. I thought about Brannock, who would arrive at the council chamber at first light expecting me to review the garrison boundary reports, and who would instead find the chamber empty. I thought about what I wanted to say to the senior pack of Duskreach, and how I wanted to say it, and why it mattered to say it correctly. I thought about Senna in the side room with the wolf sleeping at the foot of the pallet, and the silver mark on her wrist, and the way she had said, "I don't know a great deal about how this works." Neither had I until 6 days ago, until tonight. I went to the council chamber eventually, not to sleep but to think. I sat in the chair I had been failing to sleep in for 6 days, and I thought carefully about what I intended to do, and what I intended to say, and what mattered most. By the time the eastern windows began to go gray, I had come to the conclusions I needed to come to. I called for Brannock at first light. He came in and looked at my face, and then he looked at the territorial report still open on the table from the previous night, and then he looked at my face again. He said nothing. "Convene the senior pack at the second hour," I said. "The full table." He said, "Yes." "And send someone to the infirmary to ask Senna if she would join me for the first meal. Tell whoever you send that she is a guest of the holding, not a detainee. Tell them to use the exact phrasing." He said, "Yes," again, and there was a quality in his voice that was not quite surprise but was the near neighbor of it. A man who has spent 19 years learning the exact timbre of his king's requests, and has noted with professional precision a new note in it. He went to carry out both instructions. I washed and changed, and went down to the great hall. Senna arrived at the first meal with her hair rebraided, and the morclay cleaned from her boots and the wolf still at her side, which the garrison wolves in the hall all noted and said nothing about, because garrison wolves are trained to say nothing about unusual things until they understand whether the unusual thing is concerning or celebrated. She sat down across from me at the table and accepted a cup of the morning tea, and did not appear to find this situation, breakfast with the Alpha King of Tharnwell, with a mate mark on her wrist and a royal wolf at her feet, particularly alarming. She had, I would come to understand, a fundamental orientation toward the present that made the extraordinary manageable. She did not catastrophize ahead of events. She was here and she had tea, and the wolf was calm, and she would address the next thing when it was the next thing. I found this. I want to be careful with the word because I mean it precisely, magnificent. We ate. I told her what I intended to do and what it would mean, and what she was under no obligation to agree to. I was clear on the last point. The bond had recognized her. The mate mark was on her wrist. None of that was a decision I had made for her, and none of it obligated her to anything. The bond is recognized by the wolf kind as a destined fact of the world. I was old enough and had thought about the bond long enough to also consider it a beginning, not a conclusion, a door, not a destination. What happened after the door depended on what was walked through it. She listened to all of this with the focused attention she had given the wolf the night before. When I finished, she said, "You're asking if I want to stay." "Yes," I said, "in whatever form that takes, I'm asking if you want to stay." She held her cup in both hands and looked at me. I have said that her face did not perform its interior life for the convenience of observers, and this was still true, but I was beginning to learn to read it, beginning to distinguish between the expressions that were active consideration and the expressions that were something decided but not yet spoken. This was the second kind. She said, "I'd like to know more about what the mark means, in practical terms, and about Tharnwell and what it is you're doing at this border, and about the wolf runs because I've been curious about the Graymere wolf runs since I was a child and my mother told me about them." "I can answer all of those," I said. "Then yes," she said, "I'd like to stay." The wolf put its head on her foot. I called the senior pack of Duskreach to the great hall at the second hour. Let me tell you about the senior pack of Duskreach. They are 12 in number, which is the full council complement for a border holding of this rank. They are experienced, capable, and loyal to Tharnwell. I would not have them here if they were not. They are also 12 wolves who have watched their alpha king sit in this holding for 3 frontier assessment seasons, without displaying the slightest evidence of a mate bond, and who have, as a result, developed their own quiet working theory that the alpha king of Tharnwell had decided against such matters, and that the correct response was to not raise the subject in his presence. They filed into the great hall at the second hour and took their places at the table and looked at me, and then at the woman sitting 2 seats to my right with the wolf at her feet, and then at me again. All 12 of them. Brannock, who already knew something was different, stood at the side of the room with the expression of a man who has been awake since the 5th hour and has had time to prepare. I said, "This is Senna of Sorn on the Ashfin Moors. She is my fated mate." The silence in the great hall of Duskreach has a particular quality when the room is full of wolves, and something has been said that changes the shape of what is understood. This was that silence. I have stood in its near neighbor before, the silence after a treaty is signed, the silence after an assembly votes, the silence after a difficult order is given and accepted. This one was different. This one had, underneath it, the sound of 12 wolves reconsidering something they had long held as settled. I let the silence run for a moment, because I have found that silences of this kind are more useful than people give them credit for. Then I said, "She came to Duskreach last night on a herbalist errand. The gate guard directed her to the infirmary rather than the garrison stores. The bond surfaced at the moment she tended the wolf that has been in distress for 6 days. The mate mark is confirmed." I held out my wrist. The mark was visible. I looked along the table at Senna, who held out her own wrist without theatrics, and the mark on it was visible too. I said, "She is a guest of this holding and a guest of my protection. I will be sending word to the capital today. I am telling you directly rather than leaving it to report because you are the senior pack of this holding and you are owed the directness." Aldrich Brennan, the pack's senior commander, no relation to me, a man named for the same tradition of naming that runs through several of the frontier families, said, "My lord," he paused, The pause was, I thought, respectful rather than hesitant. "Is there anything you need from us?" "For the moment," I said, "your ordinary work, which I trust you to do as you always do. I will call a full table meeting when I have more to tell you." He said, "Yes, my lord," and the rest of the table said, in the way of a pack that has received word from its alpha and is now settling that word into its understanding, something that was not quite a collective sound but was in its effect equivalent to one. They filed out. Brannock waited until the room was clear, then looked at me with the expression of a man who has 19 years of disciplined restraint and is, at this moment, very close to the edge of it. I said, "You can say what you want to say, Brannock." He said, "I said the wolf knew something you didn't." "You were right," I said. "Thank you for saying it." He made the acknowledging sound that is his version of a smile, the sound of a man who does not smile often but registers moments that deserve it, and went to dispatch the message to the capital. The days that followed were full. I should not pretend it was simple. Senna had a life in Sorn, and a mother's practice to return to, and the supply delivery she had originally been making needed to be accounted for and rerouted. She spent the first week in correspondence. I gave her the holding's full communication resources, which she looked at with the expression of someone who is not quite certain what to do with unlimited access to messenger wolves and a dedicated clerk, and then decided to simply use them. And she put her affairs at Sorn in order with the methodical efficiency of a woman who has spent her life managing a healer's operation on her own. She asked questions about everything. About the Graymere Wolf runs, about the frontier assessment process and what it was measuring and why it mattered, about pack law and the bond's formal recognition under it, about what I did on the days when I was not doing the work of a king. I told her more in that first week than I have told most people in years of acquaintance, because she asked directly and listened without performing an expected reaction, and because the experience of being asked directly by someone who is genuinely interested in the answer is, I have found, one of the rarer ones. She told me about Sorn, about the moor's particular micro-seasons, which she tracked with the obsessive precision of a woman whose craft depends on when plants flower and seed and go dormant, about the remedies her mother had developed over a lifetime and which she was still learning to fully replicate, about the particular landscape of the Ashfin Edge, which she described as the kind of place that looks inhospitable from a distance and becomes, as you come to know it, one of the most legible places in the world. I told her I had never been to the Ashfin moors in summer. She told me what they were like. I found myself, for the first time in many years, thinking about a season I had not yet been in. The bond settled over the course of those days, not with drama, but with the slow, clarifying process of two people learning the shape of each other's presence. A bond recognized by the mate mark is a beginning, as I told her. What becomes of it is a matter of what is built in the space it opens. I had known this in theory. I was discovering what it meant in practice, which is different from knowing something in theory in the way that most important things are different from their theories. She stayed at Duskreach. She did not make this declaration formally. She did not announce it. She simply, each morning, continued to be present, asking questions and tending to things that needed tending and sitting with the wolf in the evenings when the wolf came to find her, which it did every evening without fail. She wrote to her mother. I did not read the correspondence, but I gathered from her manner afterward that her mother's response had been brief, direct, and entirely characteristic. She organized the holding's herbalist stores, which Brannock reported to me had not been properly organized in several years, and which she accomplished in an afternoon with the focused attention she appeared to bring to all tasks she decided were worth her effort. The third week, I took her to the Graymere Wolf runs. This requires explanation. The Graymere is not a place most humans go. It is the deep territory running ground of the Duskreach Pack's wolves, a stretch of moorland and shallow river forest that the pack has maintained for 4 generations, and which serves both as territory and as the kind of landscape that a wolf needs to remain fully itself. I take the pack there twice a year at minimum, for the running seasons. I had not intended to take anyone unfamiliar with pack custom there, because the Graymere requires a particular understanding of what you are entering. Senna had asked about it 3 times in the first week, with increasing specificity. By the 3rd week I understood that the Graymere was, for her, not a curiosity but a genuine object of study, that she had heard of it from her mother, who had heard of it from her own mother, and that the chain of transmission said it was the place where the Ashfens old moor plants grew most fully, the ones that needed undisturbed soil, and the particular water table that only the Wolf Run's maintained landscape could produce. I took her in the early morning, when the light came flat and gold off the moor, and the running frost was still on the ground. The pack wolves came with us. She walked into the Graymere like someone entering a place they have spent a long time thinking about. She did not speak for the first quarter hour. She crouched at the edge of the first river bend and looked at the bank growth with the expression of someone reading something they have only previously heard described. Then she said, without looking up, "There it is," in the tone of a person who has finally found a thing they have been looking for. I knelt beside her and looked at what she was looking at, which was a low-spreading plant with small dark leaves that I had walked past on these runs for 20 years without specifically noting. She explained to me what it was and why it mattered and what it could be used for, and why the growing conditions of the Graymere were the reason it existed there in the particular form it did. She was precise, and she was not performing the precision for my benefit. She was simply giving me the accurate information because she had it and I had asked. I listened to the whole of it. The pack wolves spread out around us through the morning light, running the long curves of the Graymere, and the sound of their movement through the frost grass was the only sound beneath her voice. My wolf inside me was the quietest it has ever been in my memory, not sleeping, not absent. Present and still, and entirely without the agitation that had consumed 6 days of my life and 3 good healers' best efforts. Present the way something is present when it is where it belongs. We were in the Graymere for most of the morning. She collected what she needed sparingly, with the deliberate restraint of someone who understands what she is taking from and does not want to take more than is needed. She asked me questions about the running routes and the seasonal patterns of the pack and the water table management that the Holdings pack keepers maintained, and I answered them, and she asked follow-on questions that indicated she had actually been listening to the answers, which I have found is rarer than it ought to be. On the walk back she said, "I'll need to go to Sorn." "When?" I said. 2 weeks, she said. "My mother will want to see the mark herself, and there are things at the practice that need handling in person, but I'll come back." She said this last part in the tone of someone stating a fact, not making a reassurance, a fact she had decided. "Yes," I said. "I want to see this in summer," she said. She meant the Graymere, when the ashen moss is flowering. "It's a different place in summer," I said. "Louder, warmer. The pack runs differently." "Good," she said. "I want to see the difference." I looked at her walking beside me through the frostlight, with the pack wolves moving around us and the morning gold on the moor and the mark on her wrist. I thought about a summer I had not yet been in. I thought about 43 years of a correctly conducted life that had been, if I was honest with myself, a house with a room I had sealed off and told myself I did not miss. I did not say this aloud. It did not need to be said aloud. It was simply true, and she was simply beside me, and both things were enough. She went to Sorn, and she came back, as she had said she would. Her mother came with her, a woman named Vreth, who looked at me once at the gate of Duskreach with an expression of thoroughgoing assessment, and then apparently found her conclusions acceptable, because she did not repeat the look and spent the rest of her visit organizing the Holdings medical stores with Senna in a way that suggested this, was simply what she did when she arrived anywhere. The formal recognition came at the Winter Assembly, in the great hall of Tharnwell's capital, before the full council and the assembled pack seniors of all the kingdom's holdings. This is the protocol for a mate bond recognition of the Alpha King, a formal event, public and witnessed, older in its form than most of the buildings it takes place in. I had attended 3 of these for other bonds over the course of my reign. I had not expected to stand in the center of one. Senna stood beside me in the clothes she had chosen, which were good and well-made and did not attempt to be what she was not, and she looked at the assembled council and pack seniors with the expression she brought to all things she had decided were worth taking seriously, which was focused and direct, and entirely without the performance of either composure or feeling. She was composed. She was not performing it. This is the difference. The pack reader confirmed the marks. The council acknowledged the bond. The formal words were said that have been said in that hall for a long time before my tenure and will be said for a long time after it. Senna said the answering words in a clear voice without hesitation, because she had decided to say them and therefore said them. The hall acknowledged with the acknowledgement of an assembled pack, a silence that is not emptiness but fullness, the sound of something understood and agreed to. I have heard that silence before in that hall for other occasions. I had not heard it directed at me. Afterward, in the smaller room adjoining the hall where the private reception was held, Brannock found a moment to stand beside me and say nothing for a moment, and then say, "Well." I said, "Well." He said, 6 days. 6 days, I agreed. He made the acknowledging sound again, longer this time. The formal naming took place that evening. I had decided against the full public ceremony that the capital's pack protocol would have mandated for an Alpha King's mate. The reasons were practical. Senna was not wolf-kind, and some of the ceremony's older forms assumed a wolf half that would have required adaptation, and I did not want the ceremony to be a thing adapted around her rather than a thing suited to what was actually true. We held it in the Duskreach Great Hall instead, where it had in some sense already begun, with the senior pack assembled and the fire lit and the wolf from the infirmary present, which seemed right. I said what I had thought carefully about how to say. I said that the bond had been recognized at the new moon 6 days before the Winter Assembly, that the mark was confirmed, that Senna of Sorn was my fated mate and the holder of my wolf's recognition, and that in the kingdom of Tharnwell this recognition carried the full weight of the crown's protection and regard. I said that she had come to Duskreach on a herbalist errand in the middle of the night, and had walked into a room with a wolf in distress without flinching, and had simply been present, which is not a small thing to be, and which I had found in 43 years of looking at the world to be rarer than it sounds. She looked at me across the table when I said this. Not a smile, but the thing I had learned to read as its precursor, the softening, the recognition. The senior pack acknowledged. The wolf at her feet lifted its head and set it back down in her lap, which is not a ceremony of the wolf kind's formal tradition, and is also, I would argue, more expressive than most of what is. We walked back through the East Passage together after the table cleared, through the same stone corridor where 6 days of pacing had ended in a stillness I had not known how to name. The wolf followed. The passage was lit by wall brackets and the particular cold clarity of a frontier night coming in under the door at the far end, and our footsteps were the only sound. She said, "The wolf runs in summer." "Yes," I said. "The ashen moss flowering." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't think, when I loaded the supply cart this morning, that this was where the night would go." "Neither did I," I said. "I was reading the same 3 paragraphs of a territorial report." She made a sound that was, this time, fully the smile rather than its precursor. We came to the door at the end of the passage, and I held it open, and she walked through into the courtyard with the wolf at her side, and the winter sky above Duskreach spreading out in the particular cold dark clarity of a night that has been watched by many people over many years, and has not yet become less itself for the watching. I stood in the doorway for a moment before I followed. The hollow feeling was gone. It had been gone since midnight, 6 days past and 3 weeks ago, when my wolf had lifted its head and gone still, and I had crossed a corridor without knowing why. And a woman on a herbalist errand had put her hand on a wolf's flank and looked at the silver mark on her wrist with the direct, focused attention of someone taking an accurate reading of what is true. I do not have a name for what settled in me that night. I have tried various ones. The bond is the wolf kind's term, and it is accurate as far as it goes, but it describes the mechanism rather than the quality of the thing. What settled in me was something that had the quality of a door that had been latched from the inside, without my knowledge, for a long time, and had now simply opened, not dramatically, not with force, but with the ease of a thing that had always been able to open, and had only needed a particular hand to find the latch. She was standing in the courtyard waiting for me, with the wolf beside her and her face tilted up at the Ashfin sky, and the winter stars were out the way they are in the frontier north when the cloud breaks, sharp and particular, and exactly where they have always been. I went through the door. I said, I want to show you the north quarter of the Greymere, in summer. There's a part of it that the pack doesn't use for running, too dense, but the water table is different there, and I don't know what grows in it. I've never had a reason to look carefully. She looked at me with the expression that was fully itself by now, the one that had the smile in it and also had, behind it, the quality I had first seen in the infirmary doorway and had been unable to name. Something that was considering a beginning and finding it, against all expectation, available. She said, I'll need to bring the smaller satchel. The full kit is too heavy for dense growth walking. All right, I said. And you'll need to tell me the names of things. The wolf kind naming, not the common names. My mother's notes use the common names, and I've never been able to match them to the Packreader texts. I can do that, I said. She nodded, satisfied the way she nodded when a practical question had been settled. Then she said, Good night, my lord. I said, Aldrich. She looked at me. I said, You could call me Aldrich. She considered this for a moment, not performing consideration, but actually performing the interior motion of deciding. Then she said, in the plain, direct voice she brought to every fact she chose to state, Good night, Aldrich. The wolf walked with her to the healer's room in the east quarter, which she had kept rather than taking the larger chambers I had offered her, and the wolf lay down at the foot of the pallet as it did every night, and I heard the door close, quietly, on the other side of the east passage wall. I stood in the courtyard for a while. There is a thing that happens when you have been braced for so long that you have forgotten the bracing, when the tension has become so much the background condition of your interior life that you stopped registering it as tension and began to register it simply as the shape of things. When that goes, there is a period of not disorientation, exactly, a period of noticing what has changed, in the way that you notice a sound that has been present for a long time only when it stops. The absence is louder than the presence was. My wolf was quiet. The frontier stars were out over Duskreach. The east passage was still. Somewhere in the holding, Brannock was reviewing the morning's reports, because Brannock reviews the morning's reports at every hour of the night that his king is not sleeping, and knows to keep himself occupied rather than waiting. He would keep himself occupied tonight, I thought. I was not going back to the council chamber. I was not going anywhere. I went to the healer's room, not inside it, which was hers, but to the bench in the east passage near the door, which was close enough that the wolf's quiet breathing was audible through the old stone wall, and I sat down on it, and I let the frontier night settle around me, and I thought about the Greymere in summer and Ashenmoss and the names of things. The door opened after a time. Senna looked out with the alert, ungroggy expression of someone who had heard a thing and was investigating it, and found me sitting on the bench, and did not appear alarmed by this. She said, "You're not going to sleep in the passage." I wasn't certain where I was going, I said, which was honest. She considered this. Then she opened the door fully and held it open and said, "The wolf has the foot of the pallet and I have the left side. The right side is simply blankets." I said, "I'll sleep in the chair." She said, "The chair in there is not a sleeping chair. It's a working chair." She was correct about this. It was, in fact, a chair I had brought from the council chamber because it was the right height for writing, and it would be a poor chair to sleep in. I went in. The wolf opened one eye, confirmed it was me, and closed it again. The fire in the small grate was down to coals. The pallet was narrow in the way of working pallets, not wide enough to be comfortable for two people, and entirely adequate for a night's rest if the two people in question have both decided not to make this complicated. Senna pulled a blanket from the chest at the foot of the pallet and lay back down on the left side, and I lay down on the right side, and the fire burned low and the wolf's breathing was steady, and the Ashfin wind came off the moors and through the gap at the window, with the particular sound it makes when the frontier night is clear. I am the Alpha King of Tharnwell. I have governed this kingdom for 20 years, through border conflicts and treaty negotiations and 2 bad harvest years, and a plague season that required everything I had. And I have done these things with the stillness that is my nature, and the directness that is my practice, and the conviction that the work is worth doing carefully. I have, in 43 years, made a complete life. I lay in the healer's room in the border holding of Duskreach, with the wolf asleep at our feet and the woman who was my fated mate on the other side of a narrow pallet, and I understood, clearly and without dramatics, what completeness had been missing from. She was already asleep. I could tell by the quality of her breathing, which was the deep, unapologetic sleep of someone who had made a decision and no longer needed to think about it. The wolf's tail moved once in a slow wag at nothing visible, the reflexive contentment of a settled animal. The fire burned low. I did not go anywhere.